Hey, just got to talk to you about, NFL is a tough business. Shilo had,
Yeah.
some bad. It's just, have you talked to him and how are his
Oh,
spirits?
most definitely. He's my son. I'm proud of my kids, all of them, and I prepared my kids for any and everything that could possibly happen in life and in sports. That's part of fathering. That's part of parenting. That's part of having a relationship.
Deion Sanders has never been shy about making tough decisions, but the latest headlines suggest his hardest challenge yet might be inside his own household. Reports of an altercation between him and his son Shilo have sparked questions about whether Coach Prime is willing to put football discipline above family ties. For a program built as much on image and accountability as it is on wins, this moment could define how Sanders is perceived not only as a coach, but as a father in the public eye. TV ratings for Colorado's spring game this past April peaked at just over 551,000 viewers, a staggering figure for what is typically a low-stakes exhibition. Yet the number that drew even more attention came not from the broadcast booth, but from the locker room. Shilo Sanders, one of the most recognizable defensive backs in college football, was absent from large stretches of practice footage following reports of an altercation with his father, head coach Deion Sanders. That sudden absence immediately set off a wave of speculation, with questions about discipline, team unity, and the delicate balance of family dynamics colliding with the cold demands of high-level football. The spotlight that normally elevates the Sanders brand into a ratings juggernaut suddenly cut in another direction, exposing the risks of building a program so heavily around one family narrative. The most immediate consequence was the disruption of Colorado's defensive plans. Last season, Shilo logged 53 total tackles, 2 interceptions, and a defensive touchdown, ranking in the top tier of Pac-12 safeties for impact plays. He wasn't just another player on the depth chart, he was a key leader in a unit that, despite its flaws, still kept Colorado competitive in several high-profile games. Losing that production, even temporarily, means defensive coordinator Charles Kelly is left scrambling to find consistency in a backfield that already allowed an average of 34.8 points per game last season. Every snap Shilo misses isn't just a personal setback, it's a measurable hit to Colorado's preparation. Coaches rely on spring reps to install schemes, iron out miscommunication, and evaluate combinations of personnel. When one of your most experienced starters is absent due to off-field conflict, that development timeline suffers. The ripple effect extends beyond the practice field. Sports media outlets reported that coverage of the Sanders family dynamic drew nearly double the engagement compared to ordinary spring football coverage. ESPN's highlight reels and FS1's debate shows seized on the disown narrative, leading to a 27% uptick in segments mentioning Colorado football compared to the previous month. On social media, clips discussing the alleged altercation racked up millions of views, outpacing even highlight packages of Shilo Sanders' spring scrimmage throws. What this demonstrates is that Deion's program is uniquely intertwined with his family. When things go right, the exposure is unmatched. When conflict surfaces, the scrutiny becomes magnified at a national level. In other words, Shilo's absence wasn't just another disciplinary footnote, it became a headline that eclipsed Colorado's on-field progress. There's also the matter of locker room perception. For any coach, especially one who doubles as a father to multiple players on the roster, consistency is critical. Players want to know that discipline is applied evenly, whether you're the head coach's son or a transfer portal addition fighting for a roster spot. Reports that Deion and Shilo clashed in a way that suggested public discipline created immediate whispers about fairness. One player benched for missing curfew or a film session might accept consequences, but if they perceive favoritism or harsher treatment based on family ties, that's when internal fractures develop. This is especially significant in a program like Colorado's, which has undergone massive turnover. Over 50 new players arrived last season alone, many of them transfers. For those athletes, buying into Sanders' culture is easier when accountability is clear. The moment it looks murky, doubts creep in, and those doubts often translate into poor on-field execution. From a financial standpoint, the timing couldn't have been worse. Ticket resale prices for Colorado's opening home game this coming fall were trending upwards, with secondary market averages rising from $175 to $260 per seat following Shadur's decision to return for another year. But in the week following reports of the altercation with Shilo, resale platforms like StubHub and SeatGeek showed a 14% dip in sales volume. That doesn't mean fans won't pack Folsom Field, but it does reflect how quickly momentum can stall when uncertainty surrounds the program's most marketable family members. For a university that generated an estimated $90 million in media exposure last season thanks to Deion's arrival, any fluctuation in family optics is a business story as much as it is a football one. The gambling markets told a similar story. Odds makers had Colorado projected at 5.5 wins for the upcoming season, with bettors hammering the over following spring game optimism. Yet after reports of Shilo's absence, sportsbooks reported a 22% drop in Colorado-related prop bets, particularly those tied to defensive performance metrics like interceptions or turnovers forced. Bettors pay attention to every detail, and when one of the team's top defensive playmakers is suddenly in question, the market reflects that hesitation in a sport where perception often drives dollars as much as production. The idea of Deion disowning his own son, even if exaggerated by media framing, had measurable consequences in real time. What makes this especially intriguing is how Deion himself has positioned accountability. From his very first press conference at Colorado, he told players bluntly, "I'm bringing my own luggage, and it's Louis." That set the tone. Perform or pack your bags. The transfer portal exodus that followed proved he wasn't bluffing. But when that same tough love mantra extends to his own family, the stakes rise. If Deion publicly removes Shilo from a leadership role or disciplines him more harshly than other players, it proves he practices what he preaches. On the other hand, if Shilo returns to the field without visible consequence, critics will say the rules are different when your last name is Sanders. In either outcome, Deion's decision reverberates far beyond one defensive back. It's a statement about whether his coaching philosophy can withstand the ultimate test of bloodline. The public relations component can't be overlooked either. Colorado's social media team has built one of the most robust content pipelines in college football, churning out behind-the-scenes footage, hype reels, and family-centered moments that feed into the Sanders narrative. In the days following the altercation, fans noticed the absence of Shilo in several official posts. Engagement dipped by nearly 18% compared to average, suggesting that the family dynamic isn't just a subplot, it's the central selling point. Removing one of the key characters from that narrative makes the story less compelling, and in today's content-driven environment, that directly affects reach, sponsorship value, and national buzz. And yet, there's an undeniable irony here. For all the talk of disowning, Deion has long emphasized that his role as a father and coach are inseparable. He's built the Colorado program on that ethos, presenting himself as both disciplinarian and mentor not just to his sons but to every player under his watch. An altercation, even one that leads to rumors of estrangement, tests the authenticity of that message. Can Deion still sell recruits and parents on the idea that he treats every player like family if his own family struggles are spilling into the public eye? That's the kind of credibility question that no recruiting pitch or NIL promise can easily resolve. So the immediate headline isn't just that Shilo Sanders may be in Deion's doghouse, it's that Colorado football, one of the most talked about programs in the nation, is now navigating a storm where performance, business, and family intersect. The numbers show it. Viewership spikes, ticket sales dipping, betting markets hesitating, social media engagement faltering. All of it underscores one reality. In the Sanders era, nothing happens in isolation. Every decision, every altercation, every public statement reverberates across college football, amplifying both the highs and the lows. And right now, that amplification is centered on whether a father can truly separate being Coach Prime from being dad. The reason this story matters right now is because Colorado football is at an inflection point, and Shilo Sanders is right in the middle of it. On the field, he isn't just another starter. He's a senior safety who logged more than 700 defensive snaps last season, finishing with 53 tackles, 2 interceptions, and a 100-yard pick six that turned into one of the most replayed highlights of Colorado's entire year. He accounted for nearly 11% of the team's total takeaways in 2023, in a defense that surrendered more yards per game than any Power 5 team outside of Vanderbilt. Losing Shilo, even temporarily, means weakening one of the very few spots that had shown flashes of reliability. That's the football side. But the larger issue is what what this says about accountability, leadership, and the balance between family ties and program culture. From a performance standpoint, Colorado can't afford another setback. The Buffaloes finished 4-8 last season, and while the offense drew national attention thanks to Shador's 3,230 passing yards and Travis Hunter's two-way brilliance, the defense ranked 124th nationally in points allowed. The gap between where the program is and where Deion wants it to be is enormous, and every rep in spring ball and summer camp is about closing that gap. If Shilo isn't present, defensive coordinator Charles Kelly has to lean on less experienced players. Sophomore Trevor Woods, who posted 84 tackles but also struggled in coverage with a 118.4 opposing passer rating, would suddenly take on more responsibility. That's not the kind of trade-off you want heading into a year where Colorado joins the Big 12, a league loaded with explosive passing attacks. The locker room consequences are just as significant. When word spread of the altercation, one of the first questions insiders raised was how this would land with the transfers who just arrived. Colorado has once again flipped more than 30 roster spots through the portal this offseason. These are players Deion pitched on a culture of accountability and a chance to be part of a national spotlight. If they see the head coach disciplining his own son, it sends one message: that nobody is above the program. But if they perceive that family drama disrupts the team without consequence, it sends another: that the rules are different depending on your last name. Either way, what Deion chooses to do now will ripple into how those new transfers commit themselves in practice, how they respond to adversity, and ultimately how the team plays on Saturdays. There's also the recruiting dimension. Colorado's 2025 recruiting class currently ranks in the top 40 nationally, a marked improvement from the pre-Deion years. But what attracts many of those recruits isn't just playing time, it's the chance to be part of the prime spotlight. That spotlight shines brightest when the Sanders family presents a united front: Deion leading, Shador breaking passing records, Shilo anchoring the secondary, and Deion Jr. running the media operations. When that image cracks, opposing recruiters have ammunition. They can tell high school athletes and their parents, do you really want to step into a program where even the coach's own family is clashing? That's a narrative Colorado doesn't want floating in living rooms during official visits. In measurable terms, this is already having an impact on fan engagement. Colorado's spring practice live streams on YouTube usually pull 150,000 to 200,000 views within 72 hours. The session where Shilo was noticeably absent drew only 98,000, the lowest of the offseason. Social media sentiment tracking showed a 22% increase in negative keywords associated with Shilo's name. Words like benched, conflict, or disowned in the 48 hours after the altercation story surfaced. That kind of dip isn't just an optics problem, it directly influences how marketable the program remains in the eyes of sponsors and television partners. Remember, Fox and ESPN aren't just investing in Colorado football, they're investing in the Sanders family brand. The timing makes this even more delicate. Colorado opens the season against North Dakota State, a powerhouse from the FCS level known for upsetting Power 5 opponents. It's the kind of game where Colorado needs every veteran leader locked in, especially on defense. From there, they face Nebraska in Week 2, a rivalry that drew more than 8 million viewers last season and set a stadium attendance record at Folsom Field. That's not just a football game, it's a ratings bonanza. If Shilo isn't on the field or is visibly at odds with his father leading up to that game, it threatens to shift the narrative away from Colorado's redemption arc and back toward dysfunction. And for a program that lives on narrative as much as numbers, that matters. Consider how much Colorado's brand is worth right now. Last year, Forbes estimated that Deion's arrival generated roughly $280 million in media exposure value for the university. Nike saw a 600% spike in Colorado gear sales in the first month of the season. Even Buffalo's ticket packages tripled in resale value, making them one of the hardest tickets to get in college football. That kind of surge depends on momentum and perception. The moment those slip, the financial tailwind slows down. If the public believes Deion can't keep his own family aligned, corporate partners may think twice about hitching themselves to the prime wagon. For Shilo personally, the consequences are even sharper. He's entering what could be his final college season with hopes of boosting his NFL draft stock. Scouts already view him as a fringe late-round prospect. prospect, a strong hitter with ball skills, but questions about speed and coverage consistency. The one thing he could count on was tape. More games, more stats, more highlights against top competition in the Big 12. Missing time, whether from suspension or reduced snaps, robs him of that. Every game counts when you're trying to rise from a day 3 projection to a day 2 pick. NFL executives won't just look at his interceptions, they'll look at whether he could stay on the field consistently, whether he demonstrated discipline, and whether his coach, his own father, trusted him to lead. And then there's the question of what it does to Shedeur. The quarterback is Colorado's crown jewel, a projected first-round NFL draft pick if he continues his trajectory. But the Sanders brothers are close, and locker room insiders note that when Shilo is frustrated, it affects Shedeur's mood as well. If Deion truly disowns or disciplines Shilo in a visible way, how does that weigh on Shedeur as he tries to lead the offense? A quarterback's focus is fragile, and distractions off the field often show up in completion percentages and timing on third downs. The family dynamic bleeds into the on-field product more than most fans realize. So why does this matter now? Because Colorado is trying to prove that last season's surge of attention wasn't a one-year flash. They want to show staying power in a new conference, against tougher competition under brighter lights. To do that, they need stability, accountability, and unity. An altercation between Deion and Shilo, no matter how it's spun, threatens all three. It creates instability by pulling a starter off the field. It raises accountability questions in the locker room, and it fractures the image of unity that made Colorado a national story in the first place. In short, what's happening with Shilo isn't just a father-son dispute, it's a stress test for the entire Prime model, and the results of that test will be measured in more than headlines. They'll be seen in ticket sales, recruiting battles, NFL draft stock, and whether Colorado actually wins football games this fall. When trying to make sense of the friction between Deion and Shilo, it helps to look back at other high-profile moments where family ties or player-coach relationships collided under the spotlight. Because while the Sanders family's dynamic is unique in scale, no other college program has had its identity so tied to a single household. The themes of favoritism, accountability, and perception have played out across sports history, and in nearly every instance, the way those moments were handled defined not just the individuals involved, but the trajectory of the teams they were part of. One of the closest parallels comes from the NBA, where Doc Rivers coached his son Austin Rivers with the Los Angeles Clippers. At the time, Doc was one of the most respected coaches in basketball, but the presence of his son on the roster became a constant talking point. Austin's role, whether he scored 20 points or went 0 for 10, was always viewed through the lens of his father's authority. Teammates admitted privately that it was sometimes awkward, because any decision Doc made about Austin, minutes, starting assignments, trades considered, was scrutinized in a way it wouldn't have been for any other player. The lesson from that era was simple. When family overlaps with coaching, perception often overrides reality. Even if Doc was being fair, the suspicion of bias or the optics of discipline lingered. That's exactly the tightrope Deion is walking now with Shilo. College football, too, has seen echoes of this dynamic. Consider the Harbaugh brothers. While Jim never coached John, their sibling rivalry and public clashes during their Super Bowl showdown in 2013 showed how family dynamics can consume a narrative. Broadcasters spent as much time analyzing their relationship as they did breaking down defensive schemes. In Colorado's case, the father-son storyline is even more central, and any altercation that spills into public view risks overshadowing the football product the way the Harbaugh Bowl once did. The difference here is that Jim and John didn't have to balance discipline with kinship inside the same locker room. Deion does, and that's where the comparison tilts heavier toward conflict. There's also the LeVar Ball and Lonzo Ball saga, another case study in how family and athletics can intertwine to the point of distraction. LeVar wasn't Lonzo's coach, but his constant media presence and his habit of publicly critiquing his son's teammates and coaches made life difficult for every organization Lonzo joined. The Lakers saw their brand explode with interest during Lonzo's rookie season, but they also endured non-stop speculation about whether LeVar's shadow undermined team unity. The point of comparison is clear. When a family brand is inseparable from the athlete, media coverage magnifies every disagreement, every misstep, every rumor. For Deion and Shilo, the Sanders name is both their biggest asset and their biggest liability. When things are going well, the brand carries them into mainstream culture. When things go wrong, that same spotlight burns hotter than it would for any other father-son dispute. Looking inside college football specifically, there have been other moments of player-coach conflict that rattled programs. In 2005, Oklahoma quarterback Rhett Bomar was dismissed from the team by legendary coach Bob Stoops for NCAA violations tied to off-field employment. Bomar had been one of the highest-rated quarterbacks in the nation, but Stoops chose program credibility over a star player. The decision sent shockwaves through Norman, but it reinforced Stoops' reputation for accountability. Colorado now finds itself in a similar moment, though the stakes are wrapped in bloodlines rather than NCAA compliance. If Deion disciplines Shilo, he sends the same kind of message Stoops did nearly 2 decades ago, that no individual, not even his own son, is bigger than the program. The difference, of course, is that Stoops wasn't risking Thanksgiving dinner when he made his choice. Statistically, the parallels also hold weight when comparing performance impacts. When Austin Rivers clashed with teammates in Los Angeles, the Clippers' offensive efficiency dropped nearly 4 points per 100 possessions in games where he started, as opposed to coming off the bench. Analysts debated whether the numbers reflected chemistry issues or simple lineup variance, but perception became reality. Similarly, if Shilo's absence leads to Colorado's defense allowing just one more touchdown per game, the measurable consequence would be catastrophic. Last season, the Buffs lost 3 games by 1 score. Add a touchdown swing, and those margins vanish, turning winnable games into guaranteed losses. Numbers tell the story not just of individuals, but of how their presence or absence reshapes outcomes. There are also parallels in how teams navigated the business side of family-driven narratives. When Lonzo Ball entered the NBA with the Lakers, merchandise sales spiked immediately. His jersey sold out within hours, second only to LeBron James that season. But as LeVar's antics grew tiresome and Lonzo's production leveled out, those sales dipped sharply. By year 2, Lonzo had dropped out of the top 15 in NBA jersey sales entirely. The arc mirrors what Colorado faces. Shilo is a core part of the family brand. If fans believe he's at odds with Deion, sales of Sanders-themed merchandise could flatten. Already, Fanatics reported that Shedur's jerseys outsold Shilo's by nearly 4-1 last season. If the altercation narrative lingers, Shilo risks slipping further down that pecking order, reducing his NIL leverage and weakening Colorado's family-centric marketing machine. Another comparison comes from football's professional ranks. Think about Terrell Owens' infamous sideline clashes with coaches and teammates. Owens was one of the greatest receivers of his generation, but the perception of being disruptive often overshadowed his production. TV ratings for games involving Owens regularly surged. Eagles games in 2004, for instance, averaged more than 21 million viewers nationally. But when conflicts boiled over, front offices soured, sponsorships pulled back, and eventually Owens bounced between teams despite still having talent. That same double-edged sword exists for Colorado. When Deion and Shilo clash, eyeballs tune in, but sustained conflict could alienate boosters, diminish donor trust, and weaken long-term stability. Even more revealing is how quickly perception flips when conflict is resolved versus when it festers. When Doc Rivers' Clippers eventually moved past the nepotism narrative, after Austin hit big playoff shots and teammates embraced him, the story shifted to resilience and growth. Conversely, when LeVar Ball refused to back down and the Lakers distanced themselves from his involvement, the narrative hardened into dysfunction. Deion and Shilo's situation could go either way. If they reconcile publicly and Shilo returns to form on the field, the storyline becomes about overcoming adversity. If tension lingers, the story cements itself as evidence that the prime model can't scale without internal fractures. From a numbers standpoint, these historical comparisons also show how fan interest behaves. The Harbaugh Bowl in 2013 drew 108 million viewers, the 3rd most watched Super Bowl at the time, because family dynamics layered onto the game itself. People tune in for drama, but the fallout afterward left both brothers exhausted by the attention. John openly admitted he wanted the focus back on football, not family rivalries. That's exactly the risk Colorado faces now. Early season ratings might spike if the altercation is still a headline, but fatigue will set in if the program is defined more by family squabbles than by wins and losses. And if fatigue sets in, broadcasters shift their spotlight elsewhere, leaving Colorado without the same leverage in future media in negotiations. The comparison that might sting most, though, comes from within Deion's own legacy. Back in his NFL playing days, Deion was known for his swagger, confidence, and ability to control a locker room. He clashed with opponents, he clashed with media, but he rarely clashed with his own teammates. The persona was built on unity under his leadership. Now, decades later, the narrative flips. The leader who once commanded respect must prove he can hold even his own son accountable. It's a twist that challenges the very foundation of the Prime brand, because fans aren't just asking if he can coach, they're asking if he can father and coach without one role undermining the other. So when we compare this moment to history, the conclusion is clear. Family and athletics have always been combustible when put under the same roof. Sometimes it fuels ratings, sometimes it fuels resentment, and often it does both. For Colorado, the stakes are higher because the entire program's identity is built on those family ties. Unlike Doc Rivers, who could eventually trade his son, or LeVar Ball, who could be ignored by front offices, Deion doesn't have that out. Shilo isn't just another player. He's a son, a starter, and a storyline. And how Deion navigates this dynamic will determine whether Colorado's trajectory mirrors the Clippers' recovery, the Lakers' unraveling, or something entirely unprecedented in college football. To fully understand the weight of Deion and Shilo's reported clash, you have to step beyond the field and into the business machine that powers modern college football. Because while Colorado's on-field struggles are measurable in yards and points, the program's meteoric rise under Deion Sanders has always been about more than the scoreboard. It's about television ratings, ticket revenue, merchandise spikes, NIL opportunities, and the cultural currency of being a program people can't stop talking about. When family drama disrupts that carefully balanced ecosystem, the impact isn't just emotional, it's financial, and the numbers tell a story that Colorado cannot afford to ignore. Start with the broadcast side. Last year, Colorado football became a television juggernaut. Their Week 2 showdown against Nebraska averaged 8.73 million viewers on FOX, making it the most watched college football game of the regular season outside of rivalry week. Their opener against TCU, another non-traditional marquee matchup, drew 7.26 million. Even a late season game against Oregon State, normally a ratings afterthought, pulled 2.7 million. Those numbers weren't about Colorado's record. They were about the Sanders effect. ESPN and FOX executives openly admitted that Colorado was driving their highest Saturday ratings in years. Now, those executives are watching closely. A story about Deion disowning his own son is ratings gold in the short term, but over time, broadcasters get nervous when drama threatens to undermine performance. If Shilo is benched, suspended, or visibly estranged, the family-driven narrative that made Colorado so marketable could start to fray. Viewership might hold steady for now, but the risk is in fatigue. Audiences tuning out if they see dysfunction rather than inspiration. Ticket sales tell a similar story. Before Deion arrived, Colorado's average home attendance hovered around 43,000 per game in 2022. Last season, every home game sold out, pushing average attendance to over 50,000, the highest in school history. Secondary markets like StubHub reported a 300% increase in resale activity, with average prices surging past $250 per ticket for marquee games. That boom was fueled by the Sanders family aura. Fans wanted to see Coach Prime, Shedur's throws, Shilo's defensive plays, and Travis Hunter's two-way brilliance. But since the altercation, resale activity for the Nebraska rematch has dipped by 14%. That may not sound catastrophic, but in a market where perception drives demand, even small declines reflect hesitation. Fans aren't just buying a football ticket, they're buying into the Prime family brand. If that brand looks fractured, the premium pricing begins to wobble. Merchandise numbers also underline how central Shilo is to the financial picture. According to Fanatics, Colorado was the top-selling college football program in merchandise sales in 2023, surpassing even Alabama and Georgia. Within that surge, Shilo Sanders' jersey was the runaway leader, ranking in the top 5 of all NCAA jersey sales nationally. But Shilo wasn't far behind. His jersey cracked the top 25, outperforming dozens of quarterbacks and running backs at bigger programs. Those sales are directly tied to his role as both a player and a son of Coach Prime. If conflict sidelines him, those jersey sales dip and Colorado's total merchandise revenue shrinks. For the athletic department, which reported a record $18 million increase in football-related revenue last year, even a 10% drop in family-driven merchandise represents millions left on the table. The NIL, name, image, likeness ecosystem is equally vulnerable. Shilo has carved out deals with companies like Overtime, Beats by Dre, and smaller regional sponsors in Colorado. Collectively, NIL valuations estimate his worth in the $700,000 to $900,000 per year range. Not at the level of Shadir's multi-million-dollar portfolio, but still significant. Those deals are predicated on stability and marketability. Brands don't like uncertainty. If the public narrative shifts from Shilo the playmaker to Shilo in conflict with his father coach, companies may hesitate to renew or expand contracts. Already, analysts who track NIL engagements have noted a 12% drop in social media engagement on Shilo's branded posts since the altercation news surfaced. That's the kind of trend that leads sponsors to pull back. And when sponsors pull back, the broader NIL collective at Colorado takes a hit, which in turn makes recruiting harder. Fan sentiment is another measurable piece of the puzzle. Social media data shows that mentions of Shilo Sanders spiked nearly 250% in the 72 hours after the altercation story broke. But of those mentions, more than 40% carried negative or skeptical tone, a sharp rise compared to the usual 10 to 15% baseline for athletes. Words like disowned, conflict, and fracture trended alongside his name on X, formerly Twitter. Even on Instagram, where the Sanders family has built a loyal following, comment sections shifted noticeably. Posts that once overflowed with praise and emojis now featured fans questioning unity, asking whether Deion was treating his sons differently than other players, or suggesting the program was becoming a reality show. That perception bleeds into recruiting pitches, sponsorship discussions, and ultimately the morale of the locker room itself. Boosters and donors also factor in. Last year, Colorado reported more than $40 million in new donor pledges tied directly to the excitement around Deion's arrival. A significant portion of those donations came from out-of-state alumni who were drawn back in by the national spotlight. For them, the appeal wasn't just football, it was the spectacle of the Sanders family turning Boulder into a cultural epicenter. If that spectacle begins to sour, boosters may hesitate to keep writing checks at the same rate. One donor told the Denver Post earlier this year, "I'm not giving just for wins, I'm giving because this program feels like family. If the family looks broken, that emotional connection weakens, and when that weakens, dollars follow." The gambling industry offers yet another lens. Sportsbooks saw record handle for Colorado games last year, with some estimates placing total wagers on Buffs games north of $250 million nationally across legal markets. Odds makers noted that Colorado's games consistently outperformed comparable matchups in betting volume. That's because fans weren't just watching, they were investing in the prime brand. But when uncertainty clouds one of the team's leaders, the markets adjust. Already, props tied to Shilo, interceptions, tackles per game, defensive touchdowns, have been temporarily pulled or reduced in availability on some platforms, reflecting hesitation. Sportsbooks thrive on predictability, and when family drama enters the equation, predictability vanishes. Even media partners are recalculating. Amazon Prime and Netflix both have ongoing interest in behind-the-scenes content tied to Deion in Colorado. Last year's docuseries Coach Prime was one of Amazon's most watched sports titles. But the altercation story complicates that narrative. Does the next season frame it as a family overcoming adversity, or does it risk becoming a story of dysfunction? Streaming platforms crave authenticity, but they also shy away from storylines that alienate mainstream audiences. If the altercation becomes the defining arc, it could dampen enthusiasm for renewal or reduce the value of the rights package. What's striking is how quickly all of these threads tie back to one reality. The Sanders brand is inseparable from Colorado football. That has been the program's greatest strength, but it also makes them uniquely vulnerable. Alabama doesn't have to worry about Nick Saban clashing with his son in the locker room. Georgia doesn't sell itself as a family reality series. Colorado does. And because of that, every family conflict becomes a financial, cultural, and football story all at once. In the short term, the numbers suggest heightened engagement, ratings spike, social mentions climb, and media coverage doubles. But in the long term, the deeper context reveals fragility. Ticket sales dip, merchandise softens, NIL sponsors hesitate, and donors grow cautious. The very machine that elevated Colorado into the national conversation could stall if family drama outweighs football progress. So when analysts ask why this moment matters beyond one player's status, the answer is clear. Because Colorado's rise has never been about just football. It's been about Deion Sanders turning his family into the centerpiece of a billion-dollar industry. And right now, that that centerpiece looks cracked. Whether it becomes a story of resilience or one of collapse will depend on how Deion and Shilo choose to navigate the spotlight that they themselves invited. Every program faces moments that test its foundation, and for Colorado, the fallout between Deion and Shilo Sanders is one of those defining stress tests. What happens next will determine whether the Buffaloes can stabilize their momentum heading into a crucial season in the Big 12, or whether this becomes the moment the prime experiment begins to unravel. The possibilities span a wide spectrum, and each one carries measurable consequences for the roster, the business, and the brand that has made Colorado the most talked about program in America. The first scenario is disciplinary action. If Deion follows through with a visible punishment, benching Shilo, reducing his snaps, or even suspending him for a game, he reinforces the idea that accountability comes before bloodline. That's the kind of move that wins credibility in the locker room. Players see the coach treating his own son like everyone else, and the message is clear: no one is above the rules. On the field, though, it weakens a defense that already allowed 453 yards per game last season. Colorado's projected win total sits at 5.5, and analytics models suggest they'll be underdogs in at least 7 games. Without Shilo's experience in the secondary, those odds drop even further. ESPN's FPI gives Colorado a 36% chance of reaching bowl eligibility with a full roster. Remove Shilo, and that probability falls to just 28%. A one-player absence doesn't usually swing numbers that drastically, but when that player is a senior leader in a thin secondary, it does. So discipline might pay off culturally, but cost them in the win column. The second scenario is reconciliation. Deion and Shilo could resolve their differences quickly and present a united front publicly. In that case, the story shifts from fracture to resilience, and the Sanders brand doubles down on its strongest selling point: family unity. Television networks would frame it as a redemption arc, sponsors would breathe easier, and fans would rally around the idea that even a public clash can be overcome when accountability meets forgiveness. This would keep Colorado's momentum intact going into the season opener, and from a rating standpoint, it might even boost viewership. Fans love conflict, but they love resolution even more. If Shilo steps onto the field against Nebraska in week 2 after a week of speculation, you can guarantee the game will trend on social media and likely surpass last year's 8.7 million viewers. The reconciliation scenario offers the best outcome for the program's image, but it requires Deion and Shilo to put egos aside in a way that's easier said than done under the glare of national attention. The third scenario is escalation. If tensions linger, if Shilo remains frustrated with his father's leadership style, or if the media narrative pushes harder on the disowned framing, the possibility of a transfer or even Shilo stepping away from the program becomes real. The transfer portal has redefined college football mobility. Even though Shilo is nearing the end of his college career, the option of leaving is always on the table. Were that to happen, the fallout would be seismic. Recruiting rivals would seize on the storyline that even Deion's own son couldn't thrive under him. Fans would question whether the Sanders family unity was just a marketing pitch, and NFL scouts would take note. Questions about discipline and coachability would shadow Shilo into draft interviews. For Colorado, losing him outright would gut their defensive backfield, drop their depth to replacement level players, and put even more pressure on an already vulnerable defensive unit. It would also accelerate donor fatigue, as boosters don't invest millions to watch the centerpiece family fracture. From a business perspective, each of these scenarios produces measurable ripple effects. If Shilo is benched, expect merchandise tied to his name to dip sharply. Last season, his jersey accounted for nearly 12% of Colorado's total jersey sales. That market doesn't disappear entirely, but a benching creates hesitation among fans who don't want to wear the jersey of a sideline player. Ticket resale prices would also reflect the dip in star power. Remember, last season, Colorado was one of just 3 programs where secondary market prices consistently averaged above $200 per seat, the others being Georgia and Alabama. That pricing relies on the perception of a star-studded roster. Remove one of those stars, and the premium softens. If reconciliation is the path forward, business confidence stabilizes. NIL partners are more likely to re-up with Shilo, seeing his marketability rebound after a brief dip. Colorado's social media channels, which saw an 18% drop in engagement in the days after the altercation, would recover quickly once Shilo reappears in official team content, the broader Sanders ecosystem, Coach Prime content on YouTube, Shidyor's endorsements, Travis Hunter's crossover appeal would benefit from the narrative of overcoming adversity. In effect, the brand would convert a negative headline into another storyline that keeps Colorado in the cultural conversation. If escalation happens, the financial consequences compound. A transfer or permanent split would cut Shilo out of Colorado's brand strategy entirely. Merchandise sales would plummet, NIL value would disappear, and the family-centered marketing model that made Colorado such a media darling would lose one of its pillars. For broadcasters, it would reduce the uniqueness of the Colorado storyline. Ratings might hold for Shadeur, but the sense of an all-encompassing family project would fracture. And boosters, who pledged a record $40 million last year, might hesitate to invest at the same levels. One prominent donor told Sports Illustrated in February that the appeal of giving was being part of a family story. Remove that and the donations risk leveling off. On the field, the projections are just as stark. With Shilo, Colorado's defense still grades poorly by advanced metrics. SP Plus ranked them 123rd last season, but his presence elevates them to at least competitive status in certain matchups. Without him, opposing quarterbacks will target the middle of the field relentlessly, forcing less experienced safeties into coverage mismatches. In a Big 12 loaded with explosive passing games, Kansas State averaged 32.8 points per game last year, Oklahoma State 31.2, and Texas Tech 30.2. That's a recipe for disaster. Defensive inefficiency will translate directly into win-loss outcomes. Instead of hovering around 5 or 6 wins, Colorado could sink closer to 3 or 4, undoing much of the momentum Deion built in year 1. There's also the Shedder factor. His NFL draft stock is directly tied to how stable Colorado looks in 2024. Scouts know his arm talent is elite, but they also want to see how he handles adversity, how he leads in chaotic environments, and whether his family ties distract from his development. If the altercation narrative continues, evaluators may question whether Shedeur can separate his own performance from the noise around him. That could cost him draft position, which in turn could cost him millions. Conversely, if Deion and Shilo reconcile, Shedeur benefits from the perception that his family can handle adversity, and his draft interviews become stronger as a result. The future implications also extend to recruiting. Colorado's 2025 and 2026 classes are already in the spotlight, with several four-star prospects considering Boulder, but family instability provides easy ammunition for rival recruiters. Programs like Oregon, Texas, and USC will waste no time telling recruits, do you really want to play in a program where even the coach's own son isn't happy? That kind of narrative can flip commitments. If reconciliation happens, the opposite is true. Recruits will see proof that Colorado can weather storms, that Deion's tough love approach is consistent, and that the spotlight is survivable. In the high-stakes world of recruiting, perception often outweighs facilities or geography. Ultimately, what happens next will define whether Colorado remains the most watched story in college football or becomes another cautionary tale. A benching proves Deion's credibility, but risks immediate losses. A reconciliation stabilizes the brand and keeps Colorado's momentum intact. An escalation fractures the family model and could unravel the program's cultural and financial gains. None of these outcomes are abstract. They all come with measurable consequences in ratings, revenue, recruiting, and wins. The Prime model is built on the belief that a family brand can power a football program into national relevance. That model has worked spectacularly so far, generating hundreds of millions in exposure value, record-setting merchandise sales, and national TV ratings unheard of for a team that finished 4-8, but the same model is now facing its toughest test. If Deion and Shilo can't navigate this moment, the very foundation of Colorado's rise could crack. If they can, it becomes another chapter in the Sanders family saga, one that reinforces the idea that this isn't just football, it's a movement. In the end, the story of Deion Sanders and his son Shilo isn't just about a father and a player, it's about what happens when family, football, and business collide on the biggest stage college sports has ever seen. Colorado's rise under Deion has been fueled by unity, spectacle, and the magnetism of the Sanders name. But unity is fragile, spectacle cuts both ways, and that magnetism can turn into a microscope when conflict spills into public view. Right now, the numbers show just how much it matters. Ticket sales dipping, engagement faltering, and odds makers recalibrating. Whether this moment becomes the start of a fracture or the foundation of a comeback depends on how Deion and Shilo choose to move forward. For Colorado, the lesson is clear. Family can be the program's greatest strength or its biggest vulnerability. For the fans, the question lingers. Should Deion hold his son to the exact same standard as every other player, even if that means disciplining him publicly? Or does the family brand that made Colorado a national sensation deserve protection above all else?